Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you to another live stream from our studios. With that in mind, let us turn our attention to the topic of the day. 2 years ago, actually to be exact, on June 8th, 2020, something marvelous happened, and that was a discussion, an interview between two Muslims. One we can call an academic scholar, and the other one is an apologist who had an interview with this Muslim scholar. We're talking about Muhammad Hijab interviewing Dr. Yasir Qadhi, and the rest is history, because something interesting happened during that interview that has resulted in what we have coined today holes in the narrative. With me here to take a deep dive on the commemoration of this marvelous events, no other than Dr. Jay Smith. Dr. Jay, welcome, and thank you for joining me here live in the studios.
Oh, it's great to be here on such an auspicious day. As we saw yesterday, our second anniversary. This is something we're going to commemorate every year. I put up a video yesterday to commemorate it, but it's the feedback, the comments. Over 6,000. We're going to be soon approaching 7,000 who have already watched that 40-minute video in just one day. And I think why it has caught everybody by a storm is because of what it did to the Quran. What it did to this whole notion that the Quran has been preserved. This has been always a thorn in our side. We've always heard from Muslims that the Bible has been corrupted, has been changed, has been manipulated. We don't have the original Bible. But the Quran, this book here, this book has always retained its authority, its canonicity. It has always retained its authenticity, and it is the only scripture in history that where we can trace back to the origins, that it is the eternal Quran. I mean, we've heard this so many times. The Quran makes this claim in chapter 85, verse 22. So the Quran, it does make this claim. So Muslims have always made this claim because they have to. They have no other choice. But it doesn't just make that claim. In chapter 10, verse 15, and also in chapter 18, verse 27, it goes on and says that there has been no change, that humans cannot change it. Yasir Qadhi has been many times in public. He has said this from his platform. Not one word, not one letter has changed, because the Quran makes that claim. And you can see why. If the Quran says that there is not one word, not letter, it has changed, the reason is because it is the eternal Quran. How can it be the eternal Quran if there has been one letter and one word change? But more than that, the Quran says the reason is because Allah himself protects it in chapter 15, verse 9. So the Quran makes these claims. It's never changed, not one word, not one letter. That's where Yasir Qadhi jumps off from that. Allah is the one that protects it, and it is eternal. Because those claims are there, I feel sorry for the Muslims. They have to support that. They have to defend that. They have to continue giving lip service to that. Yasir Qadhi is famous for that. Shabir Ali, Dr. Shabir Ali makes the same claim. In fact, I would suggest all of your Muslim pundits have to make that claim, whether they are radical, whether they are nominal, possibly not the liberals. The liberals I'll let go, but they only make up 15% of all Muslims in the West. That's just in the West. So this is a difficult problem for Muslims, the preservation of the Quran. They've got to shut any discussion down. They've got to shut any debate down on that. And we saw from this interview a number of things that were exposed. I don't know if you want to go and unpack that, if you want to continue with that, or if you want to go to something else. But yesterday was the day that we commemorate the destruction of the preservation of the Quran.
No, we need to continue along this line, and of course we want to talk about why was that important in terms of what Dr. Qadhi mentioned initially before he received the backlash over that.
I remember when I was the guy from North Carolina. He was the one that told me about it. He was the one that got me onto the phone. He said, Jay, are you aware that there's going to be an interview with Muhammad Hijab and Dr. Yasir Qadhi? And he was the one that wanted me to get on and look at it, because he says they're going to come up with something. And I didn't think at that time it was going to be anything great. I just thought, okay, here it is, this yada, yada, yada. They're just going to continue to talk about the preservation. I had no idea that Muhammad Hijab would ask the question he asked at the very beginning, putting his hand out there and saying, here's a blank sheet of paper. Mm-hmm. Which Quran are you going to write on it? Which Quran? Jay, we don't talk about this. This is something you don't talk about in public. Don't be filming this, please. What are you bringing this up for? These idiots, says Yusuf Qadi. What are these idiots who keep on asking these kind of questions? And I think what was really exciting about that whole interview, as we were watching it, I don't know if you watched it live. I was watching it live. I just started taking notes because this is what we brought up in 2016. This is Hatun Tash. Remember our good friend Hatun Tash? She was the one that really started this whole debate, created this whole debacle, because she decided to try to find these Qur'ans. She went into a bookshop back in 2013 in North Africa, asked for one Qur'an, and the guy behind the counter says, well, which Qur'an are you talking about? And she had a paradigm shift. Having grown up in a Muslim family, having a father who is an imam, who has always said categorically there's only one Quran, it has never changed, it cannot change because of what the Quran claims itself. So she has been brought up with that belief there is only one Quran, only one, inimitable, you might say unfettered by human hands. And that Quran is the one that we have in our hands today, this Hafs Quran. This one, in the Arabic, not the English, not the translation. We're talking about the Arabic Quran, okay? So you can see for her, when she heard this from this guy, well, she says, what are you talking about? And he started pointing. Well, he said, well, over here we have the Warsh Quran, and over here we have the Hafs Quran. And he just started holding up these different Qurans. We have the Qalun over there, we have Kisai over here, we have Ibn Kathir over here. And she just said, well, give me them all. Give me them all. I'll take them all if you don't mind. They only cost a few dollars. And so she brought them back to London with her, and she started showing me these different Qurans. And I remember started laughing. I said, no kidding. I had no idea. I had heard about this when I was in seminary. I remember we talked about this, and this was just one of those things that you referred to back to 1924, when this was a dilemma back in 1924 in Cairo. With the high schools there, because they were having standardized tests, and all these students were coming up with different answers whenever they had to do a Quranic verse. Remember, you don't write anything but what everybody knows. You always write the same words. You memorize it the same way, word for word, letter for letter. It's exactly jot and tittle the same. And so here you're having all these high school students who are coming up with different words, different references, different verses. And of course, that was a dilemma for standardized tests. And you can see, so they went to this guy named Al-Haddad, Muhammad ibn Al-Husaini Al-Haddad, who is there at the Al-Azhar University, which is considered to be the penultimate university, the best university in the world for anything to do with the Quran. And so they asked this scholar, Al-Haddad, we'll just call him Al-Haddad for now, and they asked him to choose one. Choose one. Out of how many? How many? Do you remember how many?
Well, I mean, there is a lot, basically, that he has to deal with.
30.
Yeah, and they even had to wrestle with the errors that they discovered, obviously.
Okay, well, that came later. I mean, the first thing he had to do is he had to choose from these 30. What 30 are we talking about? Well, you have the 7 that were chosen by Ibn Mujahid. Those were chosen in 936. Those are the first 7. Those are the creme de la creme. Yusuf Qadi always called these the creme de la creme.
Correct.
The best of the best. These are the ones. Well, actually, he added another 3. He had another 3 that were introduced by Al-Jazari in 1429. So he introduced another 3 that were introduced in the 15th century. Nonetheless, those 10 are known as the Ahruf. Some call them the Ahruf, others call them the Qira'at. These are the readings, the 10 readings. But interestingly, this one's not there. This is not amongst those 10. This is the Hafs one. So look at any list. So where did this one come from? Do you know the answer to that one? Do you know where this one came from?
Well, I mean, this happened to come in later from the list of transmitters.
The transmitters. So these are the students. The students of every one of the first 7. So the first 7, you get 2 students. Out of how many?
Right.
Well, not just 2, not just 3. In case of some of them, like an Asim, who is the one where this comes from. He had 91 students, 91 different students. Only 2 could be chosen.
Yeah, Asim is the Qari, the reader, and then Hafs is the transmitter, Ar-Rawi.
And who chose those transmitters? That was Al-Shatibi. When did he do this?
Later.
1194.
Exactly.
That's the 12th century, the late 12th century. He chooses 2 for each one of the 7 that have been chosen, including Anasim. He had 91 to choose from, just from the family of Anasim. But fascinating, he then chose 14. So now 7 plus 14, you now have 21. So by the end of the 12th century, you now have 21 different Qurans. So now, we're not talking about translations here. We're talking about Arabic Qur'ans. Every one of these is in Arabic. You can see them. You can read it. They are in Arabic. And that's where you get this one is introduced. So this one comes from an Asim, from the family of Asim, who died in 745. An Asim died in 745. This character is Hafs. Hafs died in 796. So roughly 50 years later, he dies, and this is the guy that is chosen by Al-Haddad in 1924 as the official Quran. What do they do with the other 29 Qurans? Do you know what they did? Remember what I said? I don't know if you remember what happened next. What did they do with the other 29 in Cairo, just in Cairo, those that were in the high schools?
They sunk him in the Nile River.
They threw them from a boat into the Nile River, thinking that would get rid of them. And you know, me and my stupidity, I thought that had got rid of them, because I thought, well, this is only a problem for... I didn't think about the fact that this is only for Cairo. And remember, over the years, I kept on thinking, okay, so they're all in the bottom of the Nile. Maybe we should swim down there and try to find them. Without thinking, wait a minute, these are all memorized by different families who come from different groups, who come from different villages, who come from different geographical areas. And in every geographical area, they memorize it different. So this one here, the Warsh, this one was actually created by a guy who died in 812. In Cairo. So this is the one for North Africa, because it's the only one from North Africa. And that's why it became popular in North Africa. And if you go there today, you will find this memorized in North Africa. This is the Warsh version. Now, yes, it is 114 surahs. It does have 6,000 verses, like this one has 6,000 verses. We're not saying it's any different verse by verse. What we're saying is, take a look at these two here. This is Hafs from Iraq. Did I have this upside down?
Yeah, flip it. Just we don't want our Muslim friends to think.
Okay, this one is Hafs from Iraq. So this one, it had nothing to do with Muhammad.
This one is Warsh.
This one is Warsh from Cairo, Egypt. So Iraq, Egypt, not from Saudi Arabia. Neither of these are Qurayshi, because we know that the Qurayshi dialect that Zayd ibn Thabit had to write, if that was Uthman dictated him to write it, he had to do the Qurayshi dialect. Neither of these are the Qurayshi dialect. Yet these are the two most popular ones today. 93% of all Muslims memorize this one, and the reason why 93% is because the Ottomans chose this. The Ottomans, who from 1300 all the way up until the 1300, basically up until 1924, they were the ones that chose this because it was the easiest to memorize. It was the closest to where they lived. That's why they liked Hafs.
Right.
But in North Africa, they liked this guy.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And of course, I want to welcome all of our viewers right now. We're live from our studio, and with me here is Dr. Jay Smith, and we are talking about the incident that took place almost 2 years ago to today. I mean, I would say exactly 2 years ago, between Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab, that resulted in what we call the holes in the narrative and the fall, if you wish, from grace for Dr. Qadi, and pulling out the video, the interview video, and even stopping the comment section on Twitter, and many things happen. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so here you have this interview, and you can see we had held those up. She had, after she brought these back to me in London, she then asked me, well, how many are we supposed to find? And I remember thinking, well, there should be about 30 of them. I wasn't really sure at that time. Anybody who wants to find, just go up on Wikipedia and put the word Qur'an, and they're all there. All the ones of the Qur'an are there. So you have the 7. In fact, go ahead and keep talking. I want to go ahead and get my, since we're going to do this, since we're live, I need to get my graph out in front of me.
So let the camera come back at me right now, and then you can go and grab that graph. But wanted also to, at least in addition to what Dr. Jay is talking about, wanted to just to update you that we have done a large number of videos today, really putting it all together in terms of the standard Islamic narrative, the problems with the book and the man and the place, and hopefully we will be releasing this new video series very soon. I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks, and it will continue for at least a good part of this year and possibly even next year. So just wanted to keep you updated. Want to encourage all of you, of course, to consider becoming also subscribers to our channels, Sira International, and also to Dr. Jay's channel, Fonder Films. I also encourage you to prayerfully consider to become a Patreon patron, all of that. With that in mind, Dr. J, you brought some of these slides right
I'm just
now.
going to put these up there so you
or
can
images.
see. Back then, this is in 2016. We held them up. This is a picture. I'll just put it up towards my camera. Here we are holding up the 26 Qur'ans that she then collected. She collected them from Jordan, she collected them from Yemen, she collected them from and she didn't go herself physically to do it. She had people that she knew were going there say, when you go there, could you get Kasai for me? Could you get Kathir for me? Could you get, she already had Warsh and Hafs. Could you get all these different other ones? Could you get Duri or Kalun or Bazi? And so she started putting together, we had 26. So finally she came to me, Hatundet, she said, let's go and take down the Speaker's Corner and show this. So we did. We held these up in June of 2016. So exactly 4 years before that infamous interview. Well, who was in the crowd but Muhammad Hijab? There he is right here. Can you see him right here, where the yellow is pointing? I know this is kind of I should have got it bigger, and I should have been prepared so I could have this up on that screen. But there you can see Muhammad Hijab. He's standing there. He stands about 6'6", and so he stood over everybody, and he pulled all the crowd. He said, all the Muslims come here. Stop looking at what they're showing you. Stop listening to what they're saying, is what he was saying. He was going to explain it to them. And so the crowd went to listen to what Muhammad Hijab said. Well, it was obviously he had not much to say, because 4 years later, he then comes and has this infamous interview with Dr. Yasser Qadhi. So you can see Yasser Qadhi right here. He's in the blue. And this is this interview with he and Yasser Qadhi. I have Shabir all over here because on the 19th, so about 11 days later, he made the same admission. So here you have two different scholars, Yasser Qadhi and Dr. Shabir Ali, two of the foremost, I would say the most foremost Muslim scholars as far as the Quran is concerned, one from Canada, the other one from Houston. He said on May 19th, yes, there are a number of different variations. Yasser Qadhi admitted it on the 8th. And what happened is he didn't want to admit it. It was you could see he was very ill at ease. He was sitting in front of his desk in that blue shirt, and he kept on trying to say, don't ask me, don't push me. I cannot explain this in 20 minutes. And then he made this amazing admission. He said, listen, this has been the most difficult problem for the last 1,000 years for Muslim scholars. He referred to Al-Jazari. Al-Jazari, who died in 1429. And he said about Al-Jazari wrote 80 different books just on this subject. This is the 15th century, and he could even come to a conclusion. And he is the authority on this material. What was it that he was coming to a conclusion on? What was the problem? Well, how can you have 30 now, by the time Al-Jazari now chooses another 6, you now have 30 different Qurans chosen from amongst 700, which were begun to be written in 736 up until 905. So from 736, you have the first one, and that was written by Ibn Ahmad al-Damask, who is from Damascus. That's why it says Damaski. So he is the first one in 736, all the way up to Idris, who writes his in 905. Writes what? They're writing the Quran. Now here's the difficulty, and this is what people haven't. This is what Yasser Qadhi or Shabir Ali have not admitted. The difficulty is this: in the 7th century, so these are all 8th, 9th, and 10th century. In the 7th century, the Quran was written in Arabic for the first time, but it wasn't really Quran, as we're finding out. It was called the Qur'an, Qara'a, which means the recitation or the reciting. It is a recitation of what? Well, as we now know, it was taken and derived from Aramaic, because the theological language in the 7th century was Aramaic. That was what was used in all of the Christian churches, the bishops, all the big cities were writing in Aramaic. Everything was written in Aramaic. But remember, the Aramaic language was for the aristocracy. It was for the educated. It was for the intellectuals. It was for the theologians. The people on the street were speaking Arabic in that part of the world. Mm-hmm. What part of the world? Not Mecca and Medina. There's nothing happening in Mecca and Medina. It's all happening in Damascus, in Baghdad. It's happening in Petra. It's happening way over into what today is Iran. These are the places where the Arabic was being percolating, and of course, in this time, they were taking and they were writing out these references in Arabic, because Aramaic was not used on the ground by the people who are the working class. They wanted something that was written in their language. The difficulty is that the Arabic was Nabatean Aramaic. Nabatean Arabic, which comes from Nabatean Aramaic, only had 16 letters, consonants, only 16 consonants. It had no vowels. It had no diacritical marks. That was the dilemma. So something needed to be done. What we now know, and this is where Al-Jalad has become real handy, and this is where Dr. Mark Doherty is now coming really handy. He says, if you look and see what happened, once Arabic became the lingua franca for the day, and that was all introduced by Abd al-Malik. Abd al-Malik introduces Arabic as the language for the whole empire. And so he then makes it a theological duty of his to make sure that the holy book itself, the book itself, must be written in Arabic. The difficulty is you could read it if it's just 16 letters. So dots had to be formed, and that's why dots were starting to be introduced. 5 dots. And you know what they are. You have the na, 1 dot above is a na, 2 dots above is a ta, 3 dots above is a tha, 1 dot below is a ba, and 2 dots is a ya. Na, ta, tha, ba, ya. So 5 different dots, 5 different letters suddenly be introduced. From 16 letters, it now jumped to 28 letters.
Yeah, and before that, they even have other dots, colored dots, to represent the harakat and the pronunciation, but they realized that's also was complicated and
Okay,
difficult.
pronunciation now is another thing. That needs vowels.
Right.
And you need 3 vowels, the dhamma, the kasra, and the fatha.
I just want to distinguish between the two in case someone thinks that we're talking about those.
There were no vowelization in Arabic in the 7th century. Nothing.
No, no, what I'm saying later, you'll notice that there are colored dots intended for the pronunciation.
Okay.
But the ones you're talking about are totally different. It's above the letters or underneath the letters to make the letter easy to understand which letter it was.
Yes. So now you have the dots added, and then you had the vowels added. Well, here's the dilemma. All of the stuff that had previously been written in Aramaic now is being introduced and interposed into Arabic by all these people in 5 different cities. In Basra, in Kufa, in Damascus, also in Mecca and Medina. So those are the 5 cities where these are now being introduced, but they're taking it from the Aramaic and putting it into the Arabic. So now they're adding their own dots and their own vowels. 3 vowels, the ah, the u, and the e sound. Well, who decides who's going to put what dots where, and who's going to decide who's going to put the vowels there? Okay, so you come along and you're living in Kufa, and you decide I'm going to put my dots here and I'm going to put my vowels here. Well, I'm in Cairo, and I'm not looking at what you're writing, so I put my own dots where I want to, and I put my vowels where I want to. And then I start a whole set of students underneath me who then follow what I'm doing, and I try to tell them what to do, but they write their own Qur'ans, and they put their dots where they want to. There was no standardization of versification. I'm sorry, no standardization of any type of vowels and dots, the harakat. There's no standardization. In fact, what's interesting is no one even opened a book and to read a page to see what they had done. Well, this became a real dilemma by the 10th century, because in every one of these 5 cities, you had a whole slew of different people writing different Qur'ans, coming up with completely different derivations. And that's why Ibn Mujahid was given the responsibility to take from these roughly 700, is what Shadi Nasr is coming up with, around 700 of these Qur'ans. He had to whittle it down to just 7. And he chose these 7 here. And you can listen, folks, this is it. This is straight from Wikipedia. You can get this on Wikipedia. Now, you won't get exactly this because I've color-coded it, and I've also put the dates to it. What they don't do on Wikipedia, they don't give you the dates. You need to look at the dates. But this list I got off of Wikipedia. You can do so as well under Qira'at. So you have what he chose, Nafi al-Madina from Medina. He chose Ibn Kathir from Mecca. He chose Abu Amr Allah from Basra. He chose Ibn Amir al-Damascus from Damascus. He chose Asim ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa. He chose Hamza al-Zalat from Kufa. And he told al-Kisai from Kufa. You notice, of the 7, 3 of them from Kufa, 1 of them is from Damascus, 1 of them is from Basra, and the other 2 are from what I would call Arabia today, Saudi Arabia today. So of the 7, only 2 are from Saudi Arabia. Only 2 are from the place that the Quran should have come from, because that's where the Qurayshi dialect is. So none of these, of the 7, only 2 of them could be possibly the Qurayshi dialect. The other 5 are all from the places where Uthman burned, destroyed, because they didn't agree with the Qurayshi dialect. See, this was lost on, this has been lost on Muslims, and this was lost on Muhammad Hijab, and it was certainly lost on Yasir Qadhi, because he went to he went to Yale University, and in 1995 he was suddenly approached with this, and he was given this list, he was shown this list, and he was given the dates, and he realized by looking at these dates, well, these had nothing to do with Muhammad, because look at the dates. 785, 738, 770, 736, 745, 772, 805 of the first 7, none of them were from the 7th century. None of them were from the 600s when Muhammad died. They should have been there in 632 when Muhammad died. None of these are from the time of Muhammad. Yet these are the qira'ats. These are the 7 qira'ats, or the 7 ahruf. These are the 7, supposedly, that I'm hearing from Muslims that Jibril gave to Muhammad. If Jibril gave these 7 derivations to Muhammad, then why are none of them from the 7th century? They're all from over 100 years after. In fact, they go from 736 all the way up into the 9th century, 805. That's just the first 7. These are just as bad, because these are all 7th and 8th and 9th century. And the same way here, all the way up until 905, that's the 10th century. So from the 8th and 9th and 10th century, you get these 30. Now, can you see the difficulty? These 30 out of 700, every one of them is different. No 2 are exactly alike. I just want to show you these 2 again, because these are the 2 that are the most popular today.
Right.
This is the Hafs. This is the Warsh. This is used by 93% of the world, but that was only because it was canonized by King Fahd in 1985. So we're talking about 37 years ago. It was finally canonized by King Fahd, made as the official. Isn't that interesting that the Saudi Arabian government chose an Iraqi Quran from Kufa and did not choose one of those from Arabia?
And they were, remember, Ibn Kathir is Mecca.
Ibn Kathir is Mecca, and so, well, Ibn Kathir is Mecca, but Nafi is a Medina. So you have Nafi and Kathir.
What I'm saying, these 2 should have been the prominent ones.
Now, be careful. It's not the Ibn Kathir of the Tafsir.
That's right.
This is another Ibn Kathir.
That's right. Ibn Kathir, the reader.
The reader. And so he died in 738, and Nafi died in 785. So they should have chosen either Medina or Mecca. Why did they choose Hafs? Because the Egyptians had chosen Hafs. Because of that one, Muhammad al-Husayni al-Haddad had chosen this book, the Hafs, in 1924. This became so successful in Cairo that they made it Egypt-wide by 1936, and so it became the standard edition for all of Egypt. That became so successful because they could standardize all the tests, so the Saudi Arabian government just decided to adopt the very same thing that the Egyptians had adopted, and that's why they made this official for the whole world. So this is the one that is used for the whole world, 1985. Folks, that's only 37 years ago. That makes me sound pretty old, because that means I'm older than this canonical text. But can you see the difficulty then for Yasir Qadhi? How is he going to explain this? Okay, I want you to put yourself in Yasir Qadhi's point. How would you have explained this if I was Muhammad Hijab and I asked you, Yasir Qadhi, which one are you going to put on this blank sheet? Which one of these is you going to put? Are you going to put the Hafs? Are you going to put the Warsh? Are you going to put the Nafi? Are you going to put Medina? Tell me, which one are you going to put, Nafi or Ibn Kathir?
Right.
Help me here. How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a logic question, really. I mean, the question was brilliant to ask.
It was a great question. I don't think either Muhammad Hijab or Yasir Qadhi knew that we were watching, because they thought this was just an in-house discussion, simple, easy discussion. I'm sitting there clapping and writing my notes down and grabbing the video itself, because I realized we got an honest Muslim funny. Yasir Qadhi is actually being very honest.
True.
This guy actually is struggling. He is showing that there's a problem here. There's a dilemma here. He is realizing that what Muhammad Hijab was asking him is something that no one had dared answer for 1,000 years, that or even our good friend Al-Jazari could not answer. Way back in the 15th century, he could not answer this. And then remember what he said. He said, I have not said a thing about this since 1995. For 25 years, he said, I have never lectured on this. He was almost proud of that he's never lectured. He says, you won't see me talk about this in public at all. But if you want to find out more, take my class. We'll do a deep dive.
Yep.
And then he gave 3 criteria of what they do with students or people or converts. He said when people are first converted to Islam, we don't even mention it. We don't talk about this. When they become intermediate, when they've been a Muslim for a little while, we say just memorize it, don't ask questions, just memorize it. Once they become advanced, he says, so he's giving 3 different criteria. Once they get advanced, then we do a deep dive. Take my class, and we'll do a deep dive. But then he goes and admits that he's never talked about it for 25 years. So, Al-Fadi, tell me something. Would you want to take a deep dive with a guy who's not talked about it for 25 years, who couldn't even answer this question? It took him 28 minutes and would not answer. How many times did Muhammad Hijab say, this should be easy? He kept on saying, this should be easy. Which Quran? Which one is it? Is it the Hafs? Is it the Wars? He even gave him some examples of which ones he would have liked to have been there.
Yeah.
After 28 minutes. Well, before the 28 minutes, he just said some other things. He looked at Muhammad Hijab and says, you in the East, Muhammad Hijab lives in London. I never knew London as being the East. But what he was saying is, you in the East. So what he was saying is, you in the eastern part of the world, not part of the Western academia. So you in the popular Muslim world, you on the internet, you are the one who is representing, you're a big internet star, you have a huge following, you have a 250,000 people that are following you. Now, you in the East, your narrative has holes in it. Ooh,
Oh, everybody's waiting for this moment.
Your narrative has holes in it. The standard narrative, he said, the standard narrative has holes in it, pointing to him.
Right.
What standard narrative? Standard Christian narrative, standard academic narrative, standard humanist narrative, the standard Islamic narrative. The standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. He coined it. Listen, credit where credit is due.
Right.
I didn't coin it. You didn't coin it.
And yeah, and he's absolutely correct. And by the way, we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to encourage everyone who has questions. A good way, because we have so many comments, to highlight it is to consider a super chat. But we have a team and we have also moderators. Hopefully they can pinpoint some of them. But I mean, he's not kidding when he said that, because when you study just the history of how the Quran was collected and by whom, you have a variety of basically stories that tells you about the event itself. So that's the kind of holes he's referring to. You don't have something consistent, you don't have something persistent, you don't have something reliable. You have to really make up your mind when you start going. But he's in academic field. That's why he is exposed to many of these things, and that's why I want people to take a deep dive by taking his course. Wink, wink.
Wink, take his course. But let's back up even further. I want to push this a little bit more. What did he mean by standard Islamic narrative has holes in it? Well, what are the standard Islamic narrative? These are the Islamic traditions. This is the Sirah of the Prophet. This means the Sirah of Ibn Hisham from 833. This is the Hadith of Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi. This is from 870 and on. This is the Tafsir of Al-Tabari and the Tarikh of Al-Tabari from 923, the 10th century. So these are all the Islamic traditions from the 9th, notice I'm not saying 7th, from the 9th and 10th century and later. That's the standard Islamic narrative, has holes in it. And what he is saying is, you live in a different world than I live in. You live in Europe, you live in London, you live all over the Muslim world, where 99% of the Muslim world can make these kind of claims. That there is not one difference, that the Quran has been completely preserved. Not one letter, not one word has changed. I, however, have to live in Houston. I went to Yale University 25 years ago, got my PhD at Yale University, and suddenly I had a crisis of faith. Now that's what Muhammad Hijab asked him about, this crisis of faith. He recoiled. Said, no. It was not a crisis of faith. It was a crisis of knowledge, a crisis of understanding. He made it really clear. That's the crisis that he had to go through in 1995. And then he turns and he says, see, you people, pointing to Muhammad Hijab, and he says, or actually he included himself, he said, we Muslims, we have a respect for the Quran. And we don't ask certain questions of the Quran. But in the West, they have no red lines. So what he was saying is, we have certain red lines beyond which you don't go in Islam. You just don't ask this question of the Quran. What you're asking me right now, don't ask it. Not in public, not on film. After the interview, yes, you can ask it, but not now. Or take my class, he kept on saying, take my class.
Right.
We have a respect for the Quran. But here in the West, in Houston, at Yale University, all over the West, there are no red lines. You can ask any question you want. That's the beauty of the Bible. That's the beauty of Christianity. That's the beauty of the Judeo-Christian the context which we have infused into our academic institutions. Listen, did Jesus say, you can't ask me that question? Did Jesus ever do that with his disciples? Did Jesus ever once say, please, I'm not going to answer that question? He was asked question after question after question. He even went to his death because of the answers he was giving. There is no red lines in Christianity. I don't know of any institution, any school where you cannot ask questions of Jesus or about the Bible. In fact, where do you think historical criticism was not birthed, but where do you think it was matured? Where did redacted criticism get birthed? And not birth, get matured on. Where do you think source criticism got matured on? How do we get textual criticism? It's all been applied to this book, the Bible. See, we have asked every question of this book, every question imaginable of this book. That's why you have Wellhausen asking this question in the 1800s. How can you trust the first 5 books of Moses? How can you trust when you have a JEDP, a documentary hypothesis? That's a good question. No one said you can't answer that. No one said you can't ask that question. No one said don't talk about it. Take the camera off. Of course, they didn't have cameras back in the 1800s. No one said do not dare say this in public or talk to me later. No, we had to answer that question. Whether or not Jesus existed, whether or not he died on the cross. Oh, listen, in the 1800s, it decimated the church. It decimated our universities. It decimated our seminaries. And it decimated the pews by 1905. But see, what we did since 1905 is we said we've got to find answers for every one of these areas. And we've got to go and we've got to find out who Abraham was. Did Abraham exist? And that's where we came across the Mari tablets and the Ebla tablets and the Amarna tablets. And these tablets, the Nuzi tablets, these 4 genres of tablets that now supported and showed exactly who Abraham was, where he lived, what kind of customs he existed in his lifetime and in that place and in that time period. And then we came across the Ebla tablets, which even talked about the 5 cities in Genesis chapter 14, verse 8. Sodom and Gomorrah, which everybody thought was fictitious. So support after support, artifact after artifact, manuscript after manuscript started coming to the fore. And that's why we now pretty much can support almost everything, so much so that Dr. Nelson Gluck, one of the leading world's authority archaeologists, says to date, not one artifact, not one mural, not one tablet, not one any type of manuscript that we can find today controverts a properly understood biblical statement.
Right.
Not one artifact that has been found contradicts a properly understood biblical statement. See, we have passed the test with the Bible because we've demanded that everybody get rid of the red lines and ask every question so that we can be held accountable. We're now doing that to the Quran, to this book, the Hafs text. The Hafs text. Between these 2 books right here that are the most popular, 5,000 differences. This was not known until we started opening both books. You can buy these, folks. You can buy these. You can get them on the internet. I've got 9 of them that I've bought. Hatun has all 30 of them. You can get them. You can buy them and then look at them and just compare them and look at 5,000 different words, 5,000 different verses, 5,000 different meanings. That means doctrinal. That means certainly practices. This means all kinds of difficulties for Muslims because this means 5,000 different theological positions. Yeah. Can you see then how that completely destroys any notion that God has preserved his word?
He didn't preserve anything for that matter. But we have some, comments here, and one caught my attention. The issue that has to do with the place. You and I did address part of that earlier today. The idea that the claim that Maqriba is Mecca. Would you like to say something about that?
Okay, and this gets back to whole other question. I always put it in 3 categories: the book, the man, and the place. The book, the man, and the place. The place is Mecca itself. And this has been a real problem, a real dilemma, because there is just no reference to Mecca anywhere. You can't find it in any documents, not any map. There is nothing about Mecca on any coins or on the inscriptions. There's just no reference to Mecca until 741. 741 is the mid-8th century. Muhammad died in 632. You've got a difficulty here. So what are they doing? They're trying to find Ptolemy. They're going back to the 2nd century.
Yeah. And that's what Shabir Ali did, basically.
He went to Ptolemy and he says, okay, there's Makoraba. And when you look at Makaraba is actually southeast of Yathrib. It's close to Yathrib. Yathrib is now Medina today, but it's, if you look on a map today, Mecca is southwest of Yathrib. So let's just take that on board. But even Arabic, as an Arabic speaker, is Makaraba, does it have the same consonants as Mecca?
No, not necessarily. This is a description of something called al-Muqarraba, meaning the one that is near. But Mecca is known as al-Mukarrama.
Okay,
not
hold on.
al-Muqarraba.
So people don't understand what you're saying. Let me just unpack this a little bit. Every Arabic word has three consonants.
That's right.
So what are the three consonants in Makaraba?
Qarraba,
Qarraba. What are the three consonants in Mecca?
Mecca is just meme, kaf, ha, you know?
Okay, meme, kaf, ha.
Yeah.
So one starts with meme, the other one starts with ka.
Right.
Not even the same three consonants.
But what I'm saying is I'm going to use an argument here and say it could be a description of the place, right?
Let's just say that, and let's just take that on board.
Yeah.
And this is where Dan Gibson has been so helpful. He says, take a look and notice the maps that were put up in the 15th, 16th, and 7th century by Laurent Fields and others, these Europeans who were taking what Ptolemy said in the 2nd century, taking his description of Arabia. He's putting all these listing in these places, but he puts a lot of them in the middle of Arabia, without thinking through that there is nothing there in the middle of Arabia, because there's a desert in the middle of Arabia. It's all desert. In the north, it makes sense. In the south, it makes sense, but not in the middle. And the reason why he didn't know that is because the Ptolemy never went to Arabia. Right. He just took from what people told him who had adventured, but they never went to the desert part because there's nothing to see there. It's called Petrea Deserta for a reason. So Gibson said, take a look at all these references. He says, this town is near this river, this town is near this mountain. But take a look, there are no rivers in the desert. The rivers are too far north. So Gibson says, now let's go and see where these rivers are today. Let's go see where they are historically. Let's see where these mountain ranges are. And guess what he found? All these mountain ranges are either in the far north or in the far south. And these are all in what is today Yemen and Oman. Well, if that is the case and these towns are next to it, that places Makaraba just right on the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia today, way down in the south, hundreds of miles away. So this Makaraba, even if it was Mecca, is nowhere near the Mecca that we know today.
Right. And really, there is a paper, you can find it on the Middle East medievalists or medieval lists, basically.com. And the gentleman who wrote this paper did assess Ptolemy's claim and other scholarly claims, and he concluded basically the consensus is not unanimous. There is no unanimity as to whether this is really Mecca or not. In fact, he quotes Crone, Patricia Crone. He says, Crone's conclusion are negative across the board. The silence is striking and significant. That's what she's saying. And it is so striking that attempts have been made to remedy it. That's what she's saying. And then in particular, she concludes that the name of Makraba has nothing to do with that of Mecca. When did she reach this conclusion? When she was looking for Mecca on ancient maps.
This is 1987.
Right.
1987, she brought this up in her book, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, and she got death threats for what she was claiming. Not just for that, she also talked about the fact that none of the Qiblas were facing. She said the Qiblas don't face towards Mecca as well. Long before Gibson said this, she was saying this in 1987, way ahead of her time.
Right.
And that's why when you look at now, we've just done a whole series looking at Mecca, so I don't want to get into that because I don't want to...
Oh, that's true. I just want to tell people you find this written by A.N.D. Morris, A.N.D. Morris from the University of Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And it says Mecca and Makraba. So all that to say, because someone did mention that, what do you have to say, Dr. J, since now Shabir Ali held this paper and says, look, Ptolemy said this. Well, that's the problem, unfortunately.
Just so people know, if you want to go back to Fandor Films, I have dealt with Makaraba. Yeah. I've dealt with the 4 major claims about Mecca from Ptolemy. I've dealt with all of them one video at a time. They're all there, and all the material that I'm using is Ian D. Morris's and Dan Gibson's material.
That's right.
It's so easy to debunk.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see if there is any other questions. If there is, if not,
let me finish off then what happened.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this is why I think June the 8th is so significant, and why we'll bring it up every June the 8th. Today is the day later, but we can still talk about what happened yesterday. When this interview finished, at the very end, after 28 minutes, Muhammad Hijab was frustrated. You can see he was frustrated. He finally put out his hand one last time. And he said, you've got to tell me which one you're going to put there. Which, I'm giving you a blank sheet of paper. I asked you at the very beginning, I need to know which one it is. Finally, Yasakadi acquiesced. And he says, they're all the Quran. So Mom said, you mean the Hafs is a little bit of Hafs? A little bit? Yes, take a little bit of Hafs, a little bit of Wars, a little bit of Qalun. You just take it and you mix it all up. And that's when you get the Quran. And I just started clapping when I saw that. I started clapping. It says, Yasir Qadi, do you know what you just admitted? Do you even know what you're talking about? Have you even looked and seen how many differences there are between these 29 versus Hafs? If you take Hafs as the standard, which is the standard today, and you compare the other 29 with it, guess how many they have found already? Differences. 93,236 differences. 93,000, not just a few, not just 5,000 that you have just between these two, 93,000 different. Do you see what you have just done? And I knew this was going to be a problem. Well, wouldn't you know? Muslim after Muslim, hundreds of Muslims started commenting, I am leaving Islam. I am leaving Islam. You had promised, you had said, you have taught us since you were black and blue in the face that there are no differences, not one word, not one letter difference. And now you're admitting that there is actually quite a few differences. And there's not just one Quran, there's quite a few Qurans. In fact, you're saying just take them and all mix them up. And that's the Quran today. How can you have 93,000 differences when God himself says that he would protect it? When the Quran says that not one word, not letter can be changed. When the Quran is very clear that this is an eternal document. If it's an eternal document, humans cannot touch it. They cannot, because God has protected it. And here you're admitting that God forgot to protect it. And not only that, you're also admitting that all these men from 736 up to 905 started creating their own Qurans because they had a dilemma, because they didn't even know how to understand the Aramaic that much of this was coming from. Yeah. See, they didn't realize this. By 2 weeks, they had to take all of those comments down. They had to shut down comments because many of the Muslims were saying, my blood will be on your shoulders, Dr. Qadi. After 2 months, they had to completely delete that interview from both of their sites. Well, we've got it. I've got it. David Wood has it.
Yeah,
Atuntash has it.
One of our moderator has it,
I'm sure you have it as well. It's on all our computers. I have the entire 28 minutes. I just put up 9 minutes of it yesterday, just the highlights, and unpacked each one of them. Go up on Fander Films and look and see it. So that is going to remain there. That's going to stay there because we need every year to remind people. But here's what's really exciting. If you take those dots and those vowels off, as what all these different Qira'at writers did, all these Qira'ats, they put the dots where they wanted, they put the vowels where they wanted to. Why don't you just take those dots and vowels and take it back to its original text? Isn't that what you should do to see where it really came from? Why don't you do what Dr. Gunther Lulling did back in 1970, the German scholar who did his doctoral thesis on this? He said, I've got a problem because there's about 25% of the Quran makes no sense. A quarter of the Quran just makes no sense. These are known as the dark passages of the Quran, like the letters that are before every one of the most of the surahs. Aleph, Lam, Mim. What are those letters doing there? No one understands. Why don't you go back and see? So what he decided to do is take off the dots, take off the vowels, and replace them with Aramaic dots and Aramaic vowels. He did that in 1970. He got the highest grade you can get for a doctoral thesis. Mm-hmm. That was in 1970, and guess what he found? By looking at the poetry, just looking at these dark passages, he wanted to find out what they meant. He was able to reproduce every one of these beautiful pieces of poetry, and he found that they are Christian hymns written in Aramaic. Remember I told you that all the language, the Nabatean Aramaic, the Syriac Aramaic in the 7th century was all in Aramaic. Why? Because that was the language of theology. That was the language of the bishopric. That was the language of the urban areas. That was the language of the aristocracy. All of these are hymns that he had found. Well, Dr. Luxemburg then in 2000 decided to go one step further. He wanted to go and look at even more. He wanted to find out all these passages like Surah 23 and Surah 70, all these passages which are confusing, just don't make any sense. So he did the same thing Dr. Gunther Lulling did. He took off all the dots and vowels and replaced them with Aramaic dots and vowels. And he found that all of this material can be traced back, can be reassessed using Aramaic back to Christian lectionaries and Christian homilies. These are sermons. These are lectionaries. These are hymns written by Christians in the 4th century. In fact, most of them are written by St. Ephrem. We're going to do a whole series just looking at St. Ephrem. I've got my scholars working on it right now. Look and see how much of the Quran was written by Saint Ephraim in the 4th century.
Amen.
And what's finding is, guess what they're finding? All of these hymns, these lectionaries, and these homilies are all about Jesus Christ.
Amen.
All about Jesus.
And
Which
we did a
means,
series, you and I, on that.
which means if you want to find the original Quran, if you really want to go back to what this book really is, if you really want to go back to its origins, you're going to find Jesus waiting for you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, brother, and thank you, everyone, of course, for watching. And tomorrow, Lord willing, I will be doing a live stream by myself towards the end of the day before I conclude here, and hopefully you can join me. I'll be giving you a highlights on what my ministry is all about and the growth that we've been experiencing in different areas. Of course, thank you. We thank the Lord, and we thank many of you who are supporters here, like Professor Yafel. Thank you so much for the good work that you do and your partnership with us, and many of you in here as well. Thank you, Dr. J, as always, and I look forward, of course, to recording more videos with you and to have you back again into our studios soon. Until we meet again, everyone, have a blessed day. Take care.